Welcome, everybody. I'm glad that so many people were able to break away from lunch. My name is Sam Muller. I am the Executive Director of HiiL. And in this panel, we are going to look on the question on how to make people-centered justice happen. How can you turn people-centered justice into a strategy or a program? To discuss this question, we have four what I would call true justice warriors on stage. These are all people that have worked on people-centered justice in their country, ahead of the curve, leading the charge, doing it in Nigeria, in Uganda, and in Kenya. And in my humble opinion, these four people represent movement that is far ahead of what we see in many other countries when it comes to people-centered justice. We're starting to know what the core elements of people-centered justice are and how those different elements could be part of a strategy. And I'll just quickly summarize those elements. First, you need data on the needs and outcomes that people need, the justice needs that people have. Secondly, you need to collect best practices and have data on interventions that work and also on interventions that don't work. Thirdly, you need innovation in delivery models, both public and in the private space. And those delivery models would be delivery models that get the interventions that work best to as many people as possible when they need it against an affordable price and based on a sustainable funding model. We have some examples of what those delivery models could be. Fourth, you need an enabling environment. You need a regulatory environment that is open to these new kinds of delivery models. You need space for public-private partnerships, and you need financing opportunities, of which some don't yet exist. And fifth and last, you need a movement. You need a network of interdisciplinary partners that keeps the sector accountable and keeps things moving. These critical components have again been reiterated in the outcome document in the ministerial meeting that took place on Monday. Let me just see. And we did a pre-forum session in April where we started exploring some of the key elements that are necessary for putting together a people-centered justice program. And the hypothesis that we came up with is that you need a couple of things to make them work, and these are the ones that we're going to explore in this session. First, you need a convincing why. You need to agree on a case for doing this. Secondly, people working on it need time and resources, which is often not there. Thirdly, you need the right knowledge on how to do it and on what works. Fourth, you need the right incentives, both financially and otherwise. And lastly, you need a certain level of trust and collaboration, cooperation to make it work. And that's what we're going to be exploring in this panel. I'm going to start with a number of questions for the panel members, which each represent a particular perspective on these 5 enablers: making the case, time and resources, knowledge, incentives, and trust and cooperation. And if there's time, we'll do a second round. If there's no time, and I already would like to warn you of that, we'd really want to engage with you, the audience. So we're going to have at least 20 minutes for that engagement. Let me start with you, former Attorney General Adeniran, State Attorney General, I was told to say. You have been at the epicenter of change as State Attorney General. You had political responsibility for it, so I mainly address you from that angle. What have you learned about making the business case politically for people-centered justice programming? And how do you maintain and build that political will? What arguments work? And which actors in your experience are easier and more difficult to bring on board?
Thank you, Sam, and good afternoon, everyone. I have found myself in 3 positions of responsibility within government over the last decade or so, and each position has prepared me for the next. And so what I'm about to share with you are really experiences from the School of Hard Knocks. I studied to become a lawyer, but I eventually found myself having an interest in implementing rule of law projects. And I want to talk about 2 things. The first is I will explain 1 or 2 examples of people-centered justice projects I helped to implement. And I will focus on the ones I think were moderately successful in the sense that they at least outlived my time in government. And then I want to talk from my experience about some of the factors I believe are responsible for some of them being successful and others not. So let me talk a bit about the Domestic and Sexual Violence Agency in Lagos State. This was conceived in 2014, September, by 3 people. We sat down, we noticed that there was an increase in the number of reported cases of sexual violence and gender-based violence in the state. We also saw an increase in the petitions received in the Office of the Attorney General. And so what we did was we started consultations with internal and external stakeholders, and we wanted to learn a number of things. And those consultations were based on a number of things that we extracted from the news reporting and the petitions we received, including the length of time it took for cases to reach the court, the unwillingness sometimes of survivors to pursue cases to their logical conclusion, stigmatization issues, and also we found that there was a lack of information about the resources that were available to survivors, and so they couldn't access this information. So we continued with those meetings with stakeholders and carried out extensive research on models from different countries, and eventually settled on a multidisciplinary, multi-agency, private-public model, which brought together civil society organizations, law enforcement, medical service professionals, including psychosocial experts, social workers, lawyers, media professionals, and so on. And one of the things we noticed was that there was a meeting of minds because the Attorney General then, who led from the front, was able to key into the energy of grassroots movements that were brought into mainstream governance in their fields of expertise. And at the time this team was formed, there was very little data available on gender-based violence, except what we got from the news reports and from the petitions. We also, from the Directorate of Public Prosecutions, we found that there were only less than a handful of convictions every year in this area. But over 7 years later, and certainly 6 years since the departure of 2 of the founders of this team, there have been over 300 convictions. There has been the setting up of a sexual offenders register, and there have been specialized sexual assault referral centers that have been opened. Primary health centers have been upgraded to provide sexual assault management services. We have both prosecutors, investigators, and judiciary creating specialist units to tackle gender-based violence over the last 3 years. And then we've had about 4,000, roughly 4,000 cases being treated by this team. A mobile USSD code has been set up to enable people from even rural areas to be able to get information about the resources available to them, and also information about their rights. And most importantly, the work has now been institutionalized in the sense that a law has now established this team formally as an agency. Now, all these initiatives were really the work of the team. And I now want to at least focus on some of the things, some of the factors I believe are responsible for the success of the team and other initiatives which I may talk about time permitting. First is stakeholder mapping. I think it's extremely important to get the stakeholders right. Many justice sector projects require services of stakeholders who are not traditionally justice sector stakeholders, whether they're within government or not. And these stakeholders must play a central role, not just a token role, and they must play a central role both in the design and implementation of the projects. And involving them right from the start is extremely important. And then I also think that the approaches to change management must be both top-down and bottom-up. That's where, when I talk about meeting of minds. And most importantly as well, there needs to be a leader who drives it at the beginning. And this leader must be someone who is visionary, someone who is passionate about the areas, someone who has capacity, is competent, and someone who definitely has people skills. Then I also think it's also good to get the partners right. We work in a context where we need institutional support on some of these projects. Some of the partners I've relied on in the past include the Nigerian Bar Association, which is a lawyers' association in Nigeria, other professional bodies, HiiL. HiiL has been magnificent. But I think we also need to get individuals who have successfully implemented these projects, maybe in bits and pieces in other areas, to come and talk to people and motivate them. And essentially, these partners help to hold the hands of a new project team to help bridge capacity gaps and share knowledge and experiences. Now, I think we also need to get the incentives right. In my country, it's easier to convince an elected official to construct a road or a bridge than to implement a people-centered justice project. And there are many reasons for this. I don't always blame them because they tell me that it's easier to convince a voter to vote for them when they're able to point to a physical project. And so what I try to do, and some of the things that I've seen that have worked, is, for example, in 2021, Ogun State, that's the state where I was Attorney General, was ranked second on the subnational rankings of the ease of doing business enforcement of contracts. And we're ranked first on the monitoring of the criminal justice sector. And these rankings, even though they're for pre-existing projects, based on the work of pre-existing projects, they help to give the elected official bragging rights. And sometimes they're able to support existing projects because of that. I also believe that naming and shaming helps, unfortunately. And if you're able, if the problem is bad enough, you find reporting or rankings that will essentially, motivate elected officials to at least address those problems. And certainly it helps when they're competing with their fellow elected officials who are perhaps already tackling those problems. Public image also helps when we talk to them about how, by addressing a particular problem, they're able to also be seen as a champion of a worthy cause. The affordability of the project, trying to make it as cost-effective as possible, and by keying into existing programs of government and so not replicating new institutions, I think that helps to minimize costs and can also be a persuasive argument. Then getting key political constituencies. And so, for example, you talk about the trade unions, you talk about traditional rulers, market association, youth groups, community-based organizations. These are large voting blocks. And so by getting them involved in these projects, you are more able to convince elected officials as well. Then the project needs to be based on a real justice need. And by this, I mean that the demand must be real. it shouldn't be one that is just simply taken from a textbook. The pressure will organically develop to persuade government to sustain the project. And this is why sometimes we find that ready-made templates do not always work. Then we need to think also at the beginning about the legal model. How do you want to institutionalize it? Do you want to set up a private foundation, which shows that the entity is independent of government? And sometimes this may work, as we did with a project we called the Public Interest Law Partnership. Or do you want a statutory agency that is funded by government, even though you can also rely on donor funding? Or a non-statutory task team, which might be a creation of policy. These conversations must be had at the beginning because they will define the lifespan of the project. And so I've tried in this to focus on creating an enabling environment. As Sam and I'm sure the other panelists will demonstrate, there are so many other building blocks to making people-centered justice programs happen systematically. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Boye. So let me just quickly try and summarize those. One, stakeholder mapping so that you know which partners to bring on board, you know where to get the political support, the voting blocks, etc. Change management, both top-down and bottom-up, and get that really right. Leaders who drive it, people skills, you really mentioned that. Incentives, the why has got to be clear. I love that. Bragging rights, naming and shaming, competition element, making it cost-effective. Make sure the problem is real. So I guess that goes back to data. And the last point, governance. Really think about the governance of that program. Thank you very much. Well, I'd now like to turn to another justice warrior, Rachel. You've had a role as the spider in the web of the justice system of Uganda as head of the Secretariat of the Justice, Law and Order sector, also known as JLOS. And in that role, you've had to deal with the different interests of all the different actors in the justice sector. And I've said it on some of these meetings, it's from the prison service, the police, the judges. I mean, everybody is there. Now, assuming the business case is made at the political level, and it decides to embark on a national people-centered justice program of some sort. Which of the four enablers do you think, the ones that we have on screen, time and resources, knowledge, incentives, trust, are the most important in your view? And can you share what you know about coordinating people-centered justice between all these different stakeholders with competing interests sometimes within the justice sector, as you've done?
Yeah. Thank you, Sam, and good afternoon. Yes, I'm speaking from the perspective of, I think he mentioned the different options that you can use, and ours is really that task force that's not necessarily established by statute, but is driven by policy. And it implements a government sector-wide program, which assigned all the institutions in government to different sectors based on their mandates. So the justice, law and order sector captures the mandates relating to administration of justice and maintenance of law and order, bringing them all together to coordinate their efforts, to coordinate the reforms, and to coordinate the interventions across the chain. And as a secretariat, we sit at the center of that process, offering the advisory support and the coordination support, which is the critical part of that whole process and is also a critical essence of ensuring people-centered justice across the entire chain of justice delivery. From the perspective of the JLOS, people-centered justice has been the primary focus of our work over the last 20 years, but in different formats, in different ways, because it's been a very long journey, taking us through different times and different experiences. But it's always been aimed at addressing the actual needs of people effectively and efficiently. And over the last 5 years, we've focused specifically on a theme that deals with empowering people, building trust, and upholding rights. And those have been the key tenets that have informed our efforts, our work, our reform processes, our interventions. we continuously check the pulse of the people to see whether what we are doing is actually addressing those needs, is actually addressing what the community requires from the justice system. And we specifically measure trust, public trust in the justice institutions, and satisfaction with the justice services. We've done that over a few years through independent surveys, through needs studies, and we've seen a consistent rise in both those indicators. Trust, for example, rising from about 46% in 2016 to about 62% now. Satisfaction rising to about 69%. And when we talk about satisfaction, we're talking about the people who have actually used the services, engaged with those services, and can report back and tell us, yes, I'm happy with what I got. But the essence of all of that is to bring all these institutions together so that they work together towards a common result. They work together to delivering a common service. And we use what we call the 3 C's, communication, coordination, and cooperation. And that informs everything that we do across the institutions. We communicate by sharing information across the institutions. We agree on a result, we work towards it in our individual institutions, we report back, we share the results, we share the information, we share the feedback that we're getting from the community and from the people and from our civil society partners. And then we use that information, the communication, all that information, we use it to build the coordination structures, the cooperation structures, agreeing on shared results, agreeing on shared interventions, agreeing on priorities, because these are government institutions dealing with their government budgets, with multiple aspects to their mandates, but we're able to sit down and prioritize and say, for this year, based on the data and the communication we get from our partners, these are the things that we need to do. And then we focus all our resources, our priorities, towards achieving those particular results. And we're able to go back at the end of the year, discuss those results together with our civil society partners, our development partners, and to see whether we've been able to achieve those results. Through that, we've been able to work through multiple strategic plans. We are now on our 5th strategic plan. And those plans have progressed through our whole justice journey, starting from 1999. And for those who know the Ugandan context, by 1999, we were really rebuilding our institutions. From the 70s and 80s, most of our justice structures had completely collapsed. Going into the 90s, we still had war in northern Uganda, the LRA conflict, which still affected the justice delivery in the northern part of the Uganda. So for the first few years of the JLOS, we focused on what we call the very basic recovery and stabilization. That's where we prioritized and directed our resources, providing basic tools to our institutions, computers, stationery, furniture, training people in the very basic skills. Once that was done, we moved into a phase of brick and mortar. We moved into a phase where we were now investing in infrastructure, building justice centers. We've undertaken to build a justice center, which is a one-stop shop for all the frontline justice services, the courts, the police, the prosecution, in every district. We have about 142 districts. We've been able to cover 79% of them. So we're progressively getting to a point where we'll be able to make sure that every Ugandan can access a frontline service center within 5 kilometers. And right now, 79% of Ugandans can do that. Once we have done that, we're now in a phase where we are focusing more on results. Because we've built the infrastructure, we've dealt with the people, we've worked on legislation and policy, and now the last 5 years, we are focusing really on the results. And that's where the question of people-centered justice becomes critical, because it's results for who? It's results for the people. What is it that they want, and are we able to deliver it to them in the way that is most appropriate for them? And that's what we've been focusing on the last few years. So we focused on specific areas: service delivery, the quality of the service that we're providing, not just the quantity, but the quality as well. Are people happy with what we're providing? Is there sufficient customer care? Is it responsive to their needs? We're also dealing with the needs of the most vulnerable people in society: the women, children, persons with disabilities, the elderly, refugees. In Uganda, we are a major refugee hosting country. So it's an area of focus for the justice needs of people who have those special needs within the community. And then we're also looking at the big reforms, the innovations, those new things, the new ways that we can deliver justice. We've had legal aid is one of our primary areas where we've had a justice center established as part of a government initiative to provide legal aid, working across the country as a frontline service. We're looking at small claims in the commercial justice arena. I know we talked about that in Kenya. It's something that we've shared, where people who have smaller claims, small businesses, people who are managing small contracts, have somewhere where they can get a quick relief, particularly in commercial justice issues. We've dealt with transitional justice issues, particularly the post-conflict areas. But right now, one of the big projects that we're dealing with is automation and digitization, automating our business processes, providing online platforms for accessing our services. And this is for, you were asking the why. The why for this was twofold. First of all, it was to harness the efficiencies that we can get through the digitized, automated platforms, but also to deal with the anti-corruption question. We wanted to take away as much the human involvement in certain processes, to make them a bit more transparent, to make them more efficient. But we also realized that if we provide these digital platforms, these automated platforms, it frees human resource. It frees a lot of the human resource from the capital city, from the major towns where people can access digital platforms. And we can redirect those resources to the rural areas, the communities that cannot access the digital platforms, but need the services just as much. So the automation is one of the big areas that we're looking at now, releasing financial and human resources, redirecting them to the communities, and also dealing with issues of transparency and anti-corruption, which are critical, one of the critical concerns of the community. So for us, I think there are two things that are the enablers that I think are most important. One of them is trust and confidence. Trust and confidence between the institutions for them to be able to work together. And that's where the coordination comes from. We set up the structures within the JLOS in such a way that we have participation at every level. We have a leadership committee where the political heads, the Chief Justice, the ministers, statutory heads of constitutional bodies, sit together, discuss their priorities, discuss their vision, and come up with an agreed position on many issues. We have a steering committee which has the CEOs, the permanent secretaries, the accounting officers, the people responsible for delivering the policy, for managing the planning and the policy decisions. They sit together, they work out the budgets, the plans, the priorities. And then we have the technical committees. These are the technical officers. We call them the think tank, because that's where the innovation, the development of the ideas, the development of the projects and the proposals is originated. But we also looked beyond the national level and moved these structures down to the district and the regional level, where all the JLOS actors at that level sit in what we call the district chain-linked committees and the regional chain-linked committees. And they sit together with local leaders, the leaders from the local governments, the leaders from the local councils, the leaders from the local NGOs and community-based organizations. And they discuss local solutions. So they deal with the problems that affect them in their local area. And they work out their own local solutions to those problems. They unblock the coordination chains at that level. And where they have challenges that they can't handle, then they escalate them up. But it offers them a platform for leadership at the community level, at the level where people have closer access to their services. And so this structure is what exists throughout, and it helps to coordinate. So, and the trust is built because of the participation, because of the shared information. And when you build that trust, you get people more committed and more involved in the processes. They own the process. And that helps to make it more effective. But I think above all is knowledge. We need to know. We're coordinating for what purpose, to what end? And that's why the research, the surveys, the interaction with the people themselves provides us with the why, the how, and the what that we need to do. So if we were to pick two enablers that I think are most critical, it's those two, trust and confidence, and the knowledge to guide what we're going to do in the course of our duties.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Wow, so this is a real life story, ladies and gentlemen, of stuff that is happening and that has been happening over the last at least 6-7 years that we've been able to observe it. a clear why amongst the leadership. Why are you doing this? Empowering people, building trust, upholding rights. I mean, some kind of big, hairy, audacious goal that is shared. A way of working. So you have the 3 C's. And what I also see is the way of working has very clear structures to make sure that at the district level, at the national level, at all these different levels, people can come together and talk. And the trust that is also fed by the way it's organized and that is driven by the mission and the data, I suppose, that drives the mission. You can actually see what the problem is and what's improving. Really good stuff to take on board. Okay, we go to the next speaker, Paul. So Paul is one of the most advanced leaders that I know in the justice sector on working with data as the head of planning and organizational performance. And he's now in the team of one of the more formidable chief justices that I've met over many years, our Honour Chief Justice Martha Koome, who I believe spoke to the audience earlier today. Her vision combined with Paul's experience in planning and organizational performance promises a lot. Now, Paul, let me ask you, how in your experience, because it's in the outcome document, it's mentioned all the time, data is important. So how in your experience can data help make the business case for a people-centered justice program? And what kind of data would be needed? And what would somebody in your position in other countries need to be able to support and need to be able to do to keep such a national people-centered justice program, such a national strategy going and going in the right direction to boot?
Thank you, Sam. Good afternoon. Let me start by acknowledging the Constitution of Kenya, which is very progressive. And the Constitution provides for alternative dispute resolution. And that's why the Chief Justice and the Judge, Justice Waweru, who was saying in the morning, they talked about alternative dispute resolution. Coming back to data, one of the questions we ask ourselves is, what do we expect people who are seeking justice? What are their expected outcomes? To me, the expected outcome of people seeking justice is accessibility, affordability, efficiency, timeliness, and responsive justice. Whether people are going to the formal justice system or they are going to informal justice system, they expect efficiency, timeliness, affordability, responsiveness of the justice. The question really comes to mind, how do we know this outcome are achieved? And that's where data comes in. Judicially, that is Kenya judicially, we started the transformation in 2010 after the new constitution. And one of the initiatives was to institutionalize performance management, which has a component of data, it has a component of performance contracting, a component of research, innovation, and also a component of quality assurance. This is what my directorate has been pursuing since 2013. How did we start it before I go to the usefulness of data? We started simple, very simple. We started with an Excel template where we developed, with the assistance of the World Bank, an Excel template. We normally call it daily court return template, where we capture all the daily court events. The case number, why it was coming to court, the judge, the judicial officer who was handling that case, the case outcome, and if it was adjourned, why it was adjourned, and the next activity of that court. With that Excel, we transformed judicially data management. We launched in 2015, and every year we are getting over 3 million case events in the entire judiciary. We have moved further, and we have now case tracking. We have automated the Excel sheet. Now we have a case tracking system, which is doing well. Also, to ensure data is used, we have performance management, where we have annual performance contracting, and the courts, they commit themselves to achieve certain targets. At the end of the year, we evaluate and score them. Some of the indicators we use are the case clearance rate, the productivity of a court, of a judge, or a judicial officer, the average time to deposition, how long is a case taking from filing to conclusion, among others. And I'll give you an example of the small claims court, which Uganda they are doing, and even our judge said is a game changer. We had many pending cases in commercial court, and that's why we started small claims court. But very interesting, after implementing or operationalizing the small claims court, the cases in the commercial court did not go down as expected. But the small claims court cases were going up. Why? There was an unmet need of the people. And 2 weeks ago, the Chief Justice was launching a small claims court in one of the courts. And the same day, a lawyer came with 300 cases to file. 2 months ago, she was in Eldoret. Another lawyer came with 250 cases to file. They have seen a solution, what they have been waiting for. What we have found out is that on average, in the Manchester court, a case takes around 300 days from filing to conclusion. And we have found in the small claims court, it is taking only 37 days. That's compare 337 days. That's a game changer. And this is the work of data, because we are monitoring what is happening.
Paul, can I ask you just one follow-up question? Because one of the things that Kenya has are the court user committees, for example. And what elements do you have in the data that is, or are you going to develop more data about the people-centeredness? So yeah, I don't know, the happiness that people have with what they get, the quality of what they get, the restoration in communities, things like that. Are those things captured yet in your system?
No, not yet, but that's why we are moving to, because we have alternative justice system, which is going out to the people. And we need to develop a system which is capturing, which should capture the outcome of that engagement. But we are focusing more on the formal, but we are moving to people-centered justice.
Wow. Yeah.
The question is, how is data important in people-centered justice? One, data is critical because we use data for identification of the needs of the people. Currently, we are using a court user satisfaction survey, and also justice survey, the one we undertook with the HiiL, to come up with the just the needs of the people,
Yeah.
which is very critical.
Fantastic.
We use data also to help management to come with informed decision making. Because you need data you need evidence-based decision making, which you get from the data. And you find in Kenya almost every month or every week, we have requests for data because people, they want to make decisions, informed decisions.
Fantastic, Paul. I'm going to stop you there because we've got to go. I still want to get some time, if you don't mind, for Christine and then some questions. But I think what we're clearly seeing here is, and I really like that example, you can start with an Excel spreadsheet and just keep going at it, and the data system will be better and better. And what I also really take from you is the fact that the data could be used for decision making. Data also includes research, and I've seen that, and data as a way to create the incentives, the performance contracting, and those kinds of things. Thank you very much. I'd now like to turn to you, Christine. You lead an amazing, innovative organization that works with non-state actors in solving conflict. So you know about the hugely important role that civil society can play in contributing and making people-centered justice happening in a people-centered justice program. So what, in your view, is needed also in the area, Rachel already mentioned it, trust, cooperation? How do you get civil society and the formal justice system to work together effectively, to get people-centered justice in place and to keep it going?
Thank you, Sam. And in fact, I thought that today I'll just focus in on that, on civil society, government relations, civil society, beneficiary relations as we go about this issue of trust and cooperation. And as an access to justice practitioner, this is what we see, what I see from the receiving end of justice as provided by all of us here in this room. It's a view from the bottom. Immense amount of work. International NGOs, local NGOs, community-based organizations, traditional leaders, everybody trying to bring some kind of service. Indeed, there's a need, and everybody's trying to fill that need. But when I look closely, what do I see? I see a justice service in turmoil, a marketplace in which everyone is trying to sell something. Everyone is coming in with a model. Everyone has something that they believe works. But are we talking to each other? Okay. Before we bring these in, are we talking to each other? What's on the ground already before I can bring it mine? I can bring it mine. There are all sorts of structures. Recently, I was doing some work for some organization. They were developing an advocacy manual, and I was looking at information from one refugee camp, and in that refugee camp there were international NGOs, national NGOs, or civil society organizations, community-based ones, government agents. It was a marketplace in which everybody is trying to help refugees in that camp with different nationalities to resolve conflict or to deal with the issues of access to justice. But they are not talking to each other. We're not talking to each other. So if we are not talking to each other, we're confusing the people that we are trying to work with. If we are confusing them, we're eroding the trust that we're hoping that we will build in order to do a good job, even for the state to buy into what it is we are trying to sell. What happens at the end of the day when we work like that? We cause forum shopping for the beneficiaries, the end beneficiaries of this work. And forum shopping means they hope from me to Rachel to the other one, because we're all selling something to them and we've confused them and they don't know the best forum to go to. What happens is incomplete solutions. We start on something and we don't finish it. They hope from there, they go to another one, they start on it, they don't finish it. But meanwhile, we're not talking about this particular beneficiary that we're trying to help. what happens is that we don't know what the other one is doing, so we're dumping from one place to another, you know. You come to me, I say, oh no, I only work on domestic violence for women in this particular sub-county. Try the next office. I don't know what the next office does, but I've just dumped that person to that office. What happens is we've managed to confuse the place in which we went to do this work. Who are we working for? Is it the funder? Is it ourselves, the passion with which we started what it is we want to do in access to justice? Or is it the beneficiary? Some of our work ends somewhere in the middle. We started, and then, you know, the money has run out, we fold up, we leave. It doesn't matter that the cases we started on or the, you know, access to justice issues we're handling, you know, have not completed. We fold up and leave. How do we make people-centered justice, you know, systematic? In a country like Uganda, and keep in mind poverty for majority of the beneficiaries of our services, keep in mind illiteracy and low levels of education, keep in mind marginalization, among many other things. So in a country like Uganda, we need clear and planned strategies. We can't each come in with what we are selling. We need to be working together, okay? And also, we need to know where we're going and what it is we're going to do there, and that's where the data comes in. I keep telling this story that one of the best things that happened to me was when HiiL came and did this justice needs survey. And we learned, we had been doing work for 20 years, but suddenly we learned that only 5% of the people looking for justice go to the formal court. And 95% of them go to other, you know, mechanisms for a traditional justice mechanism, you know, whichever others, different civil society organizations bringing different mechanisms, they are going all over there. But the national budget on administration of justice only goes to the formal justice system. So how do we link the informal to the formal? These are the things that we should be thinking about. Because the resources are misaligned. They are going to the 5%, all of them, you know, and then very little going to the 95%. But also, a lot of money is coming in from international NGOs, you know, into a society in which we are not clear when it comes in how beneficial is it to the end beneficiary that is supposed to use or benefit from this money. When we come in, can we find a way to work with the political leadership? We can come in with our own models that we think work, but then we're working on the sidelines. And the political leadership and what Rachel talked about, the justice, law and order sector is moving in a different direction. But in Uganda, for example, Rachel has talked, we have the sub-national structures now, the DCCs she talked about. In there, you can get in, understand what is being worked on, understand where you can key in so that you don't work alone, spend the resources, and then they end up not really serving anyone. Work with the state political leadership as much as possible, not on the sidelines. Make sure the data is read by the people that make the decisions. How will they read them? Don't tell them they're these poor, vulnerable people that need help. No, tell them, make the connection between justice, access to justice, and economic development, okay? Because that's the language they're going to hear, you know, the leaders. How is it beneficial to them as people who need votes? You know, how is what you're trying to do beneficial to them? It's not, they won't really be hearing you say, oh, they are so poor, or they have 1 meal a day, or they will not hear that. But they will hear things that will touch them, which is about the vote and which is about economics. Build on existing strengths and solutions. And make working together mandatory. It's not a jungle. It can be organized. We can all work together. How will my intervention complement yours? How do we improve the informal and traditional mechanisms that were there even before the formal courts were juxtapositioned, posed on them? Yes, There may be these, for example, the traditional institutions, people say, oh, those ones, they're not gender sensitive, but they were there before all the others came. How do we improve those so that we don't start new ones altogether? We must find a way to change. We must connect the formal and the informal. We must share and adopt customized best practices from wherever we've learned them and use the resources available to all of us to do more for less. We need to coordinate. We can't say that enough. We need to coordinate. We need to build coalitions, and networks. We need to work together, not against each other. We see a lot of that. Working against each other, almost competing for the space, yet we can all fit in that space and work together. We need some kind of clearing house, okay, to enable us to be effective. I come in, I enter, you don't know what I'm doing. He comes in, he enters, I don't know what they're doing. Can we have some kind of place we go? The DCCs would be a very good place because the district chain link committees in Uganda, if you're an NGO that is saying you're doing so much, they'll check you out. And after checking you out, they'll ask you to account. You say you spend so much on us, on the people of this district, but we don't see the results, okay? And very soon you will have to be weeded out if what you're doing is not really, if what you're saying you're doing is not really what it is you're doing. Consult those for whom you work. Develop agreeable and agreed minimum standards to play by, because what are the standards? Okay, we can't each be having our own standards. Like I've said, we're going to confuse the end beneficiary. We must develop a minimum package of services. A lot of money comes and it gets poured in and someone is doing very little. It's a lot of money, it's gone, but we don't see anything. A minimum package of services that we are going to deliver. We have to be systematic. Referral pathways. We must know what everybody else is doing so that we can refer cases deliberately to whoever is best placed to handle them. I always wonder, M&E, monitoring and evaluation. I know we do it in our own little spaces, but is there a way to think about it being done more systematically, about it keying into the formal, about it keying into the justice, law and order sector, so that whatever we have done is all tied up together and we can see the results, as Rachel was saying.
Thank you. Well, we've unearthed a lot of things that need to somehow come together to put in place national people-centered justice programs, but we've seen that there are a number of things that you have made work in your countries. I just wanted to see, there's not that much time left, but there's one question that I got from the audience on my iPad, and maybe you could just quickly say something about that. Given what you've said, and again, we have 6 more minutes, so maybe just a brief word. Somebody was asking about using this and using everything that we've learned for scalable solutions, because that's in the end what we're after. And then maybe looking at the incentives that we discussed. What would be your advice if you wanted to work on scalable solutions addressing justice challenges? Maybe start with you, Boye.
Yes, so I think my first piece of advice is to start small. Start small, but be strategic. Be strategic in the sense that the justice need you target should be one addresses a real problem, and 2 can create a domino effect. I give one example very quickly. We developed in Ogun State the Public Interest Law Partnership, which is a group of private lawyers coming together, working also with legal aid institutions, which are government institutions, to provide pro bono services to whoever needs a lawyer. And we gave them a priority to focus first on essentially ensuring that people who are detained in police stations have access to counsel, and also to ensure that they don't stay longer than they should, that is constitutionally allowed, they're not tortured, they're provided with all the services that they would require. And by introducing a police duty solicitor scheme within the public interest law partnership, we're able to address two problems that also help to move the chain along. So that would be my example. Please start small, but be strategic about where you start.
Rachel.
I think from my perspective, the most important thing, find the right person to do the job. Whatever it is that you want to achieve, find the right person, not the most convenient person. The person whose responsibility it probably already is, because chances are that person has at least the basic resources to start, and then you can build from that. So if, for example, you're going to deal with an issue that relates to the prisons, go to the prisons first, and let them build it into their structures and build it into their systems. That builds the sustainability, it builds the ownership. So I think find the right person first and foremost, and then it's really to make the case to the other respective authorities, those who provide the finances, those who provide the other policy guidance. Make the case to them for that particular intervention. And making the case is similar to what Christine is saying. Not necessarily, we understand what the end result is, but make the case that they will understand. Yeah. If you want the resources, why should they put this money into this intervention? Many people say justice is a consumptive area. It's somewhere where money just gets poured down. We'd rather put it into roads and hospitals and schools. Make the case that if you put this investment into this justice initiative, it's going to reap this benefit, either through savings or through revenue or through some other economic empowerment result. So make that case to the relevant people. And I think if you do that, you can scale up the intervention.
Great. Paul, scale.
Thank you. Mine is to listen to data.
Listen to data. Yeah.
Have lengular feedback, have lengular monitoring, and the data will give you dilation to scale up or not. Thank you.
Thank you. Christine.
Like Rachel, if the relevant people are not playing with you, it's going to take you a very long time.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it seems, and I won't even try to summarize this, but we have the emerging 7 lessons of people-centered justice programming. 1, be very clear about the why. Very practical, very down-to-earth, very clear. Make the case. 2, the importance of partners, stakeholders, that you know who you're doing it with. 3, leadership and people need to be right. The right leadership, the right people with the right competencies. 4, the importance of structures and governance, really thinking that through. Who talks to who? How do the different levels communicate with each other? 4, incentives.
5.
MEL, we've heard about bragging rights, and for incentives you need data. Knowledge is the 6th one. Knowledge with data on the needs, but also knowledge about incentives, about interventions that work. And lastly, the most important and the 7th, you keep emphasizing trust. The importance of trust. Building trust, constantly working on trust, because otherwise it isn't going to work. I hope this has given you some sense of the kind of things we all need to be working on if we want countries to start writing people-centered justice strategies, people-centered justice programs, if we want funders to start funding people-centered justice programs. We need such programs in almost every country, and we need them fast if we are to achieve Sustainable Development Goal 16. If what we talk about in this forum doesn't remain just words. Those programs could take many different forms, could have many different components, but we roughly know now, what the elements are, and we've heard from this amazing panel what it takes to make them happen. The 7 lessons of people-centered justice programming. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sam.